The silence in the room was a weapon, and Jake Vaughn wielded it with surgical precision. It was a cold, sterile silence, broken only by the rustle of papers, that decided a decade of a life. Across the mahogany table, Cecilia Brooks felt every tick of the clock on the wall as a hammer blow against her future. He pushed the final document towards her, his smile not reaching the cold steel in his eyes. "Sign this, Cecilia, and we can all move on." And when she finally looked up, her voice steady despite the tremor in her soul, and said, "I'll be fine, Jake. You'll see." He did something she would never forget. He laughed. It wasn't a chuckle. It was a deep, dismissive roar of contempt. A laugh that echoed the unspoken words, "You are nothing without me." That laugh was his greatest mistake. The conference room on the 47th floor of the Omni Tower felt like a sterile, high-altitude tomb. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off the chrome legs of the chairs and the polished surface of the table that stretched between them, a glossy brown ocean of separation. For 10 years, Cecilia Brooks had helped build the company housed in this building, Sterling Vaughn Enterprises. Her ideas were the bedrock, her late nights the mortar, her quiet, unwavering support the steel frame. Jake, her husband, was the face, the charismatic, handsome visionary who took her blueprints and sold them to the world as his own masterpieces. Now she was being unceremoniously evicted from the life she had co-authored. Jake's lawyer, a man named Arthur Finch with a face like a well-oiled leather briefcase, cleared his throat. "Ms. Brooks, the terms are, as you'll see, exceedingly generous. A one-time lump sum, the deed to the townhouse and the navy blue sedan. Mr. Vaughn wishes for this to be as amicable as possible." Amicable! The word was a slap in the face. There was nothing amicable about discovering your husband of 12 years was having an affair with the head of marketing, a woman half his age named Tiffany, who thought Synergy was a brand of energy drink. There was nothing amicable about being told your contributions to the company were merely the supportive duties of a wife, legally indistinguishable from arranging dinner parties. Cecilia's gaze flickered from the papers to Jake. He leaned back in his chair, a portrait of magnanimous power in his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit. He hadn't aged a day, the silver at his temples, only adding to his distinguished air. He looked every bit the tech mogul CEO, a title she had practically gifted him. "Sterling Vaughn is valued at $900 million, Jake," Cecilia said, her voice a low, controlled hum. The sound was alien in the vast, silent room. "The initial algorithm for its predictive analytics engine. That was my doctoral thesis." Jake sighed, a theatrical display of patience wearing thin. "Cecilia, we've been over this. You abandoned your doctorate to support my dream. Our dream," he corrected himself, a flick of his wrist dismissing the distinction. "You chose a different path. You can't retroactively claim ownership of ideas discussed over pillow talk. That's not how the world works." "It was more than pillow talk, and you know it." She countered, her knuckles white as she gripped the pen. "I wrote the initial code, on our honeymoon no less, while you were networking by the pool." Finch shuffled his papers uncomfortably. "Ms. Brooks, your name is not on any of the founding documents or patents. Legally, your claim is non-existent." Jake finished for him, his tone sharp and final. "Look, Cecilia, I'm giving you a life of comfort. You will never have to work another day. You can join a book club, take up pottery travel, do all the things you said you never had time for." The condescension was suffocating. He was painting her as a dilettante, a kept woman whose hobbies were a fair trade for the empire she'd conceptualized. Every word was designed to diminish her, to shrink her down until she was small enough to fit into the neat little box he had constructed for her post-divorce life. She stared at the signature line, her entire world reduced to an inch of blank space. All the sacrifice, the missed holidays, the times she'd worked through the night to fix a critical flaw in the system while he was accepting an award for its flawless performance. It all came down to this: a check and a car, an ending. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the sanitized air of the office burning her lungs. She looked directly at Jake past the smug CEO and saw the man she'd once loved, the ambitious, brilliant, and deeply insecure man who had needed her brilliance to fuel his ambition. That man was gone, replaced by this cold, polished stranger. "I don't want your comfort, Jake," she said, her voice finding a new, harder edge. She pushed the pen away. "I just want you to know that I'll be fine." Her gaze was unwavering. "You'll see." And that's when it happened. Jake Vaughn looked at her, at the woman who had given him everything, the woman he was now casting aside, and he laughed. It started as a low chuckle, a vibration in his chest, then grew into a full-throated, disbelieving roar. It bounced off the glass walls, a sound of pure, unadulterated contempt. It was the laugh of a man who held all the cards, looking at an opponent with an empty hand who had just declared they would win. "Fine," he choked out, wiping a tear of mirth from the corner of his eye. "Oh, Cecilia, you're adorable. What are you going to do? Write a blog? Go back and finish that dusty old PhD? The world has moved on. I've moved on. You wouldn't last 6 months out there. The real world is brutal." He leaned forward, the laughter subsiding into a pitying smirk. "Take the money, Cecilia. It's the last best thing I can do for you. It's your golden parachute into a life of irrelevance. Be grateful." The echo of that laugh was the last thing she heard as she finally mechanically signed the papers. Arthur Finch notarized the signature with a decisive thump. It was done. As Cecilia stood up, her chair scraping softly against the floor, she didn't look at Jake again. She walked out of the room, her back straight, her head held high. But inside she was not broken. She was forged. The heat of his contempt had burned away the last vestiges of the woman she had been. In the ashes, something new and dangerous was beginning to smolder. The echo of his laugh wasn't an insult. It was a countdown. The first month was a study in disorientation. The townhouse, once a symbol of their shared success, now felt like a gilded cage filled with ghosts. Every photograph on the wall was a lie. Every piece of furniture held a memory that now felt tainted. Jake had been surgically efficient, removing his personal effects within a day, leaving behind gaping holes on bookshelves and empty spaces in the closet that seemed to scream with absence. Cecilia moved through the silent rooms like a phantom. For days she did nothing but exist. She'd wake up when the sun was high, make coffee she wouldn't drink, and stare out the large bay window at a world that kept moving without her. The city was a relentless hum of purpose, of people with places to go, things to build, lives to live. Her own life felt like a paused film, the screen frozen on a scene of quiet devastation. Her friends called their voices thick with practiced sympathy. "You're so much better off," her best friend Chloe insisted over the phone. "He was a parasite who fed off your talent." "He won, Chloe," Cecilia whispered back one evening, curled on a sofa that suddenly felt monstrously large. "He has everything, and I have this house, this empty, silent house. You have you, Cecilia. That's what he never understood. He rented your brain. He never owned it." But in the quiet darkness of the night, those words felt like hollow platitudes. Jake's laughter was a constant looping soundtrack in her mind. You wouldn't last 6 months out there. It was a prophecy he expected her to fulfill. She found herself scrolling through news articles about him. Jake Vaughn, CEO of Sterling Vaughn, announces groundbreaking new AI initiative. There he was, smiling from the cover of Forbes Technology, his arm around Tiffany, who was now the company's new Chief Innovation Officer. The title was a cruel joke. Tiffany's greatest innovation was mastering the office Nespresso machine. The lump sum from the settlement sat in her bank account, a figure with so many zeros it felt like a typo. It was, as Jake had called it, a golden parachute. But a parachute only slows a fall. It doesn't stop you from hitting the ground. Cecilia knew that if she started living off that money, she would be fulfilling his vision for her, a slow, comfortable fade into obscurity. The turning point came on a Tuesday 4 weeks after the signing. It was raining, a relentless gray drizzle that matched her mood. While clearing out a box of old university notebooks, a painful exercise in archaeology, she found it. tucked away in a folder labeled Hypotheticals, was her original unadulterated thesis proposal. It wasn't just the predictive algorithm that Jake had simplified and commercialized. It was so much more. The core of her work had been about prescriptive analytics, not just predictive. It wasn't about telling a company what their customers would do. It was about modeling ethical, sustainable, and efficient pathways to help a company decide what they should do. It factored in variables Jake had deemed unprofitable, like long-term customer trust, employee morale, supply chain ethics, and environmental impact. He had taken her brilliant, multifaceted engine and stripped it down to a blunt instrument for maximizing short-term profit, no matter the collateral damage. As she read her own handwriting, the elegant, complex equations unfurling across the page, something shifted inside her. The fog of grief began to dissipate, replaced by a cold, clear anger. He hadn't just stolen her idea. He had mutilated it. He had taken her life's work and turned it into a caricature of itself. That night, for the first time in a month, she didn't just stare at her laptop. She opened it. Her fingers, tentative at first, then flying across the keyboard, began to move with a familiar, forgotten rhythm. She wasn't just typing. She was building. She pulled up the current market analysis of Sterling Vaughan Enterprises. She read their quarterly reports, their client testimonials, their stock performance. Jake was a master salesman, but his foundation was flawed. He had prioritized rapid expansion over stability. Clients were impressed by the initial results, but churn rates were higher than industry average. The Sterling Vaughan algorithm was good at predicting immediate trends, but it was a blunt tool lacking nuance and long-term strategic vision. It was a muscle car, loud, fast, and terrible on the corners. Cecilia knew its weaknesses because she had designed the original superior engine. She stayed up all night, fueled by black coffee and a righteous fury that burned brighter than any passion she had felt in years. She mapped out Sterling Vaughan's entire client portfolio. She identified their vulnerabilities, the accounts they were most likely to lose. She sketched out a business plan on a legal pad, her handwriting sharp and decisive. She wouldn't go back to her PhD. She wouldn't write a blog. She would do the one thing Jake was convinced she was incapable of doing. She would compete with him. She would take the mutilated corpse of her idea, resurrect it, and build it into the elegant, powerful system it was always meant to be. And then she would use it to dismantle his empire piece by piece. By sunrise, the rain had stopped. Cecilia stood in her home office, the floor littered with papers, her laptop screen filled with code and financial projections. In the center of a whiteboard, she wrote 2 words in bold black marker: Aura Analytics. It was a name that signified light energy and the intangible essence of a thing. Everything that Sterling Vaughan, with its cold, hard name, lacked. She looked at the words not with hope, but with the grim certainty of a general preparing for war. This wasn't just about business. It was about reclamation. She was no longer falling. She was building a new architecture from the ashes of her old life, and its sole purpose was to cast a shadow so large it would blot out Jake Vaughan's son. The 6-month countdown had begun. The second month was a blur of calculated, relentless action. Cecilia sold the townhouse. The real estate agent was shocked. "But it's a magnificent property, Ms. Brooks. The market is trending up." "I need liquidity, not comfort," Cecilia had replied, signing the papers without a flicker of sentiment. The ghosts were evicted. She used a portion of the proceeds to rent a sleek, minimalist apartment and a modest, open-plan office space in a tech incubator downtown, a place humming with the desperate, brilliant energy of startups. The rest of the money, a formidable 8-figure sum, became her war chest. Jake had assumed she would cling to the symbols of the life he'd given her. He had misunderstood her completely. She wasn't sentimental. She was strategic. Her first hire was a man named Ben Carter. Ben was a data engineering genius she'd known from university, a quiet, unassuming prodigy who Jake had once interviewed for a senior position at Sterling Vaughan and dismissed as lacking a killer instinct. Jake's loss was Cecilia's gain. Ben saw the elegance and ethical superiority of Cecilia's full algorithm in a way no one else could. He just took the top layer. Ben had marveled scrolling through her original code on a projection screen in their empty office. This is a cathedral. He sold them a tool shed. Ben signed on as Chief Technology Officer before she could even offer him a salary package agreeing to work for equity. His belief in her vision was the first real validation she'd had. Their first 3 weeks were spent in a caffeine-fueled frenzy. They didn't write a single line of new code. Instead, they conducted a corporate autopsy. They delved deep into the known architectural flaws of the Sterling Vaughan system. Cecilia, with her intimate creator-level knowledge, knew exactly where the skeletons were buried. The system had a fatal flaw in its data integration protocols, a shortcut Jake had insisted on to get to market faster. It meant that while it could process huge volumes of existing data, it was clumsy and inefficient at integrating new real-time data streams, the very lifeblood of modern analytics. He's running a V8 engine on bicycle wheels. Ben summarized, a grin spreading across his face. It looks great on the showroom floor, but it can't handle a real race. This was their opening. Aura Analytics wouldn't just be more ethical. It would be faster, smarter, and infinitely more adaptable. They would build the system she had always envisioned. While Ben began assembling a small elite team of coders, all of them brilliant misfits undervalued by the larger tech world, Cecilia focused on the business architecture. She incorporated Aura Analytics, filed the foundational patents under her own name, and began to build the brand. It was the opposite of Sterling Vaughan's loud, aggressive marketing. Aura's branding was quiet, confident, and sophisticated. The message wasn't about domination, it was about enlightenment. Don't just predict the future, understand it. Her next crucial move was contacting Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a legendary venture capitalist, a silver-haired shark who had a reputation for seeing value where others didn't. Years ago, Cecilia had sat next to him at a tech gala. While Jake was across the room holding court, Cecilia and Marcus had engaged in a deep hour-long debate about the future of ethical AI. He had been impressed, telling her, "Your husband has the sales pitch, Mrs. Vaughan, but you have the vision. Be careful you don't lose it." She had never forgotten that. She requested a meeting. His assistant was dismissive, offering a slot 3 months away. Cecilia sent a single follow-up email to Marcus directly. Subject: Sterling Vaughan's Achilles heel body. Mr. Thorne, Jake Vaughan built an empire on a flawed version of my work. I have the schematics for a better one. Give me 30 minutes. Cecilia Brooks, formerly Vaughan. He agreed to a video call the next day. She didn't pitch him for money. She already had that. She pitched him for his reputation. She laid out her plan with cold, clear precision, showing him the technical vulnerabilities of his rival and the market gap Aura was built to exploit. She wasn't asking for his investment, she was offering him an opportunity to back a winner in a race he didn't even know was being run. Marcus Thorne listened, his face impassive on the screen. He asked a few pointed, brutal questions which she answered without hesitation. When she was done, a slow smile spread across his face. "He laughed at you, didn't he?" Thorne said, his voice a low rumble. "I know Jake. He's an arrogant fool who mistakes confidence for competence. He always underestimated you. He didn't offer money. He offered something better." "I'll make a few calls," he said. "There's a major player in the logistics sector, a company called Dynacore Logistics. They're Sterling Vaughan's flagship client, and they are getting very, very tired of that bicycle wheel engine you mentioned." The call ended. Cecilia leaned back in her chair in the still empty office, the city lights beginning to twinkle outside. The blade was forged. Now it was time to find the first chink in the armor. The 3rd and 4th months were a testament to the power of a focused, singular goal. The Aura Analytics office, once a cavernous, empty space, was now a thrumming hive of activity. Ben's team of 6 elite coders worked in a state of near symbiotic intensity. Whiteboards were covered in complex algorithms, the air thick with the smell of coffee and the low hum of servers. They were building Cecilia's cathedral, and they were doing it at a breathtaking pace. Cecilia, meanwhile, became a master of corporate espionage, all of it perfectly legal. She hired a top-tier market research firm to gather intelligence on Dynacore Logistics' pain points. The reports confirmed Marcus Thorne's tip and her own suspicions. Dynacore, a global shipping behemoth, was struggling with real-time supply chain disruptions. Sterling Vaughan's system could tell them where their ships were yesterday, but it couldn't effectively model the cascading impact of a sudden storm in the South China Sea or a labor strike at the Port of Los Angeles. They were making billion-dollar decisions based on stale data. Armed with this knowledge, Cecilia and her team worked with surgical focus. They didn't build a one-size-fits-all product. They built a bespoke, revolutionary solution specifically for the logistics industry. Aura's platform, code-named Pathfinder, could integrate live weather data, geopolitical news feeds, social media sentiment, and real-time shipping manifest to create a dynamic, living map of the global supply chain. It didn't just predict problems. It prescribed solutions in real-time, rerouting shipments, adjusting inventory levels, and optimizing fuel consumption with an efficiency that was until now purely theoretical. Marcus Thorne made the introduction. The first meeting with the board of Dynacore was nerve-wracking. Cecilia walked into a boardroom filled with grim-faced executives, men and women who controlled a fleet of ships that could span the equator. They were loyal to Jake Vaughn, but they were hemorrhaging money. She didn't start with a sales pitch. She started with their problem. Last Tuesday, your vessel, the Star of Magellan, was delayed by 12 hours due to an unpredicted weather event off the coast of Singapore. That delay, according to our model, will cause a cascading shortage of semiconductor components at a factory in Munich, costing you an estimated $4.3 million in penalty clauses. Sterling Vaughan's system will flag this problem for you tomorrow morning. Ours is flagging it for you right now. On the main screen, she projected Aura's Pathfinder interface. It showed the Star of Magellan, a tiny blip on a massive map, and then, in a series of rapidly expanding red lines, the devastating global domino effect of its delay. Then, with a click, she initiated the Aura solution. Blue lines appeared elegant and precise, showing an optimized rerouting of cargo from another vessel, automated adjustments to the Munich factory's production schedule, and a projected cost mitigation of over 90%. The room was silent. The Dynacore CEO, a formidable man named Robert McKinnon, stared at the screen, then at Cecilia. Mr. Vaughn assured us his new AI initiative was addressing these issues. Mr. Vaughn is adding a new spoiler to his muscle car, Cecilia replied, her voice calm and steady. I'm offering you a Hyperloop. We can run a 2-week confidential pilot program alongside your current system. If we can't outperform Sterling Vaughan by at least 50% in every key metric, I will walk away and personally pay for your wasted time. It was an audacious, impossibly confident offer. They accepted. For the next 2 weeks, the Aura team worked around the clock. The pilot program was a resounding success. It wasn't just better, it was a quantum leap forward. Pathfinder was identifying and solving problems hours, sometimes days, before Sterling Vaughan's system even registered them as a possibility. The day the pilot ended, Cecilia received a call from Robert McKinnon himself. Ms. Brooks, he said, his voice devoid of its earlier skepticism. We need to talk about a full-scale implementation. We will not be renewing our contract with Sterling Vaughan Enterprises. Dynacore wasn't just Sterling Vaughan's flagship client. They were nearly 15% of Jake's annual revenue. It was more than a cut. It was a deep, grievous wound. That evening, for the first time in months, Cecilia left the office before midnight. She went to a quiet, elegant bar and ordered a glass of expensive scotch. As she sipped it, she allowed herself a small, cold smile. She hadn't heard from Jake. Not yet. But she knew he would be feeling it. The first tremor in the foundations of his empire. He still didn't know who was behind Aura Analytics. To him, they were just a mysterious, aggressive new startup. He wouldn't connect the woman he'd dismissed as a future pottery enthusiast with the force that had just poached his biggest client. He wouldn't see her coming until it was far too late. The laughter had stopped echoing in her mind. It was now just a distant, pathetic sound, soon to be drowned out by the roar of a falling giant. The loss of the Dynacore account sent shockwaves through Sterling Vaughn Enterprises. Jake Vaughn, blinded by his own arrogance, initially dismissed it as a fluke. In an emergency all-hands meeting, a recording of which was leaked to a tech industry blog he called Aura Analytics, a flash-in-the-pan startup that had likely undercut them on price with a vaporware product that would soon collapse. He was wrong, and the market knew it. Sterling Vaughn's stock dipped by 7% overnight. It was a minor tremor, but it was the first time his company had ever shown a sign of vulnerability. Cecilia knew Jake's playbook. When threatened, he didn't innovate. He attacked. The first assault was subtle. A prominent tech journalist known for his cozy relationship with Jake published a skeptical hit piece on Aura Analytics. It hinted at data security issues and questioned the background of its unknown founder, painting the company as a risky fly-by-night operation. It didn't work. Cecilia, anticipating this, had already courted a more respected journalist from the Wall Street Journal. She gave her an exclusive, not about the drama, but about the technology. The journal piece, titled "The Prescriptive Revolution: How Aura Analytics is Redefining AI," was a glowing testament to their superior system, complete with an anonymous but powerfully positive quote from a major global logistics firm. Aura's reputation was solidified. Jake's next move was more direct. He tried to poach Ben Carter. The offer was absurdly lucrative, a C-suite title at Sterling Vaughn, a salary that was triple what Aura could afford, and a massive signing bonus. Ben forwarded the offer email to Cecilia with a one-word reply, LOL. Loyalty, Cecilia was discovering, was a currency Jake had never bothered to mint. His entire company was built on transactions, not relationships. By month 5, Aura Analytics was no longer a secret. They systematically targeted Sterling Vaughn's most vulnerable, high-value clients. They didn't just sell a product, they sold a partnership. Cecilia met with every potential client herself. She didn't talk down to them or dazzle them with jargon. She listened to their problems and then demonstrated with irrefutable data how Aura could solve them. One by one, they fell like dominoes. A major pharmaceutical company, a national retail chain, a European banking consortium. Each defection was another nail in Sterling Vaughn's coffin. The market was taking notice. Sterling Vaughn's stock was now in a steady, undeniable decline. Jake was in a panic. He was pouring money into a failing R&D department, trying to reverse engineer Aura's success, but he was trying to fix a foundational flaw. It was like trying to turn a rowboat into a submarine by giving it a new coat of paint. The true moment of revelation for Jake must have been excruciating. Cecilia imagined him in his sprawling office, the one she had helped him design, staring at Aura Analytics' leadership page on their website, staring at her face. The name Cecilia Brooks, using her maiden name, a name he hadn't heard in over a decade. The woman he had laughed out of his life. The ghost he thought he had exorcised. The first time he reached out, it wasn't a call. It was a legal threat. A cease and desist letter from Arthur Finch arrived accusing Aura Analytics of intellectual property theft and patent infringement. It was a desperate, baseless gambit. Cecilia didn't reply herself. She hired the most notoriously aggressive IP law firm in Silicon Valley. Her lead counsel, a woman named Diana Shaw, who was famous for making tech billionaires cry on the witness stand, responded with a letter that not only dismantled their claims, but also subtly hinted at a potential countersuit against Sterling Vaughn for the commercialization of concepts developed by Ms. Brooks prior to the company's founding. Finch's office went silent. It was a checkmate. Jake knew that any legal discovery process would unearth Cecilia's doctoral thesis and old research notes exposing the truth of the company's origins for the world to see. Now he was truly afraid. He called her personal cell phone. She was in her office watching the live feed of Sterling Vaughn's stock price as it hit a 2-year low. She let it ring 4 times before answering. "Cecilia?" His voice was strained, a bizarre mix of disbelief and fury. The smooth, confident baritone was gone. "Jake?" She replied, her tone perfectly neutral, as if speaking to a stranger. "What is this? What are you doing?" he demanded. "I'm running a business," she said simply. "My business, my clients. You're using my own ideas against me." He seethed. the hypocrisy apparently lost on him. Cecilia allowed a moment of silence to hang in the air. "No, Jake," she said, her voice dropping to a cold, quiet register. "I'm using my ideas. The complete versions. The ones you were too short-sighted to understand." There was a sputtering sound on the other end of the line. He was losing control. "This is revenge, isn't it? This is some petty vindictive—" "Revenge is a passion," Cecilia interrupted smoothly. "This is not passion. This is business. You taught me that. You said the real world was brutal. You were right. You just never imagined I'd be the one who was better at it." She could hear his ragged breathing. He was cornered, humiliated, and utterly bewildered. The man who saw himself as a king was being dethroned by the consort he had banished. "I will ruin you, Cecilia," he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "I will burn my own company to the ground before I let you take it." "You already are," she said softly and hung up the phone. She looked at the clock on her wall. It was the end of the 5th month. His prophecy was running out of time. The dawn of the 6th month arrived not with a bang, but with the chilling silence of a coming storm. Jake Vaughn's threat to burn his company to the ground was about to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, enacted not through a blaze of glory, but through the slow, corrosive fire of his own panic. Cornered and hemorrhaging credibility, he made the one move every failing titan makes. He declared a price war. In a tense company-wide memo, he framed it as a bold, aggressive strategy to reclaim the market from opportunistic parasites. He slashed the prices for Sterling Vaughn's services by a staggering 60%, a figure so deep it guaranteed a loss on every new contract. To his beleaguered employees, he sold it as a show of force. In the hollows of his own mind, it was a desperate, panicked gambit to stop the bleeding, to prove he was still in control. He believed he could starve Aura Analytics out, assuming they were a fledgling startup running on fumes. Across the city in Aura's sunlit, vibrant offices, Cecilia watched the news of the price war break on a financial news network. Ben Carter stood beside her, a tablet in his hand displaying their financial projections. "He's doing exactly what we predicted," Ben said, a note of awe in his voice. "Model B, Scenario 4. The Cornered Animal Protocol. He thinks we're vulnerable." Cecilia said, her eyes fixed on the television where a frantic-looking analyst was questioning Jake's sanity. "He thinks we can't sustain a loss. He doesn't realize we're not taking one." She had architected Aura for this very moment. With its lean, elite team, hyper-efficient proprietary code, and zero corporate bloat, Aura's profit margins were astronomical. They could have matched Jake's prices and still remained profitable, but Cecilia refused. Engaging in his war would be to legitimize his tactics. Instead, she executed a countermove of elegant lethality. She authorized a press release announcing a new complimentary Aura partnership program. Every new client would receive 6 months of dedicated on-site integration support and strategic consulting, a service worth millions at no extra cost. The message was clear. While Sterling Vaughn was devaluing its product, Aura Analytics was adding incalculable value to its partnerships. Jake was selling a cheap commodity. Cecilia was offering an indispensable alliance. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for Jake. The last of his wavering clients saw the writing on the wall. Why sign on with a flailing company gutting its own value when they could partner with a stable, innovative market leader who was investing more in them? The internal collapse at Sterling Vaughn accelerated. The hallways of the Omni Tower grew quiet, the atmosphere thick with fear and the scent of packed cardboard boxes. Key talent, the brilliant engineers and data scientists Jake had long taken for granted, began to defect in droves, with many sending their resumes directly to Aura Analytics. The most public and, for Jake, most painful departure was Tiffany. There was no dramatic confrontation. She simply didn't show up for work one Monday. Her security badge was deactivated, her office cleared out. A day later, her LinkedIn profile was updated with a single devastating line: Chief Innovation Officer, open to new and exciting opportunities in forward-thinking organizations. The woman for whom he had torpedoed his marriage had just jumped from his sinking ship without so much as a backward glance. The betrayal was a perfect poetic bookend to his own, a narcissistic wound so deep he could barely process it. The financial press, which had once lionized him, now circled like sharks. A brutal feature in the Wall Street Journal titled, "Vaughn's Folly." Inside the death spiral of Sterling, Vaughn laid his failures bare. It detailed the technological stagnation, the catastrophic loss of key accounts, and the exodus of talent. It painted him as a charismatic salesman who had been outmaneuvered and outclassed at every turn by a mysterious, more agile competitor. The day of the quarterly earnings report was Jake's judgment day. He sat alone in his vast office, the view of the city he had once considered his kingdom, now a mocking panorama of his failure. When his CFO delivered the final report, his face ashen, Jake stared at the numbers in numb disbelief. Revenue had cratered by over 40%. The price war had not only failed to attract new business, but had burned through their remaining cash reserves at an astonishing rate. They had posted a net loss so profound it was an existential threat. The report was released to the public after the market closed. The following morning, the bell at the New York Stock Exchange sounded like a death knell. Sterling Vaughn's stock ticker symbol SCT didn't just dip. It fell off a cliff. It opened down 30%, then 40%, then 50%. Trading was halted twice. By noon, over 60% of the company's remaining value had been vaporized. The $900 million empire was now a penny stock pariah, its smoking ruins a testament to the hubris of its founder. Jake was trapped. The company was drowning in debt, its technology was obsolete, and its brand was toxic. No reputable tech firm would touch them. Bankruptcy was no longer a possibility. It was an inevitability. This was the moment. Cecilia, watching the stocks collapse from her desk, made a call. Operating through a discreet third-party M&A firm known for handling hostile takeovers, she made her move. An offer was presented to Sterling Vaughn's terrified board of directors. It came from an unnamed private technology consortium. The offer was brutally, insultingly low, a fire sale price that would barely cover their secured debts, leaving shareholders with pennies on the dollar. It was, however, the only offer they would ever get. The alternative was Chapter 7 liquidation, a corporate graveyard from which nothing would be salvaged. The board convened an emergency meeting to which Jake was summoned. He walked into the room where he had once ruled as an undisputed king and found himself facing a tribunal. The faces that looked back at him, once deferential, were now cold with fear and resentment. They presented him with the offer, their voices shaking with a mixture of anger and relief. "It's a pittance, Jake." One board member, a man who had vacationed with him for years, spat out. "But it's the only lifeboat we have." Jake tried to fight to rally them, but his charisma was gone, his power extinguished. He was just the man who had flown their golden vessel directly into an iceberg. The board delivered the ultimatum. They were accepting the offer. His immediate resignation as CEO was a non-negotiable condition of the sale. That evening, Chloe arrived at Cecilia's apartment with a bottle of vintage champagne. "To the Queen!" She toasted, her voice filled with triumphant glee. "You didn't just bring Goliath to his knees. You made him hand you the slingshot and beg you to use it." Cecilia accepted the glass but stared out the window at the city lights, her expression thoughtful, not celebratory. "It doesn't feel like a victory, Chloe," she said, her voice quiet. "It feels like balancing an equation. It feels like justice." "Justice is the best kind of victory," Chloe argued. "He laughed at you, Cecilia. He told you that you were nothing. Tomorrow you are going to walk into a room and own every last piece of his world. You have to enjoy this, for all of us who have ever been underestimated." A small, sharp smile finally touched Cecilia's lips. "Oh, I will," she said, turning from the window, her eyes clear and resolute. "I'm not enjoying the victory itself. I'm enjoying the symmetry." She was no longer an avenging angel driven by the heat of a wound. She was a master architect ready to lay the final perfect stone on the structure she had meticulously designed. The conference room was a precise and deliberate echo. Cecilia had ensured it. The acquisitions firm she'd hired was one of the city's most powerful, and their offices were a catalog of corporate aesthetics. When they had asked for her preferences for the closing, she had given them a single clear instruction: find a room on a high floor with a long mahogany table and a view of the city's heart. She wanted him to feel the phantom limb of his old power, to be haunted by the ghost of the man he used to be. Cecilia arrived 10 minutes early, a silent statement of control. Diana Shaw, her formidable lawyer, walked beside her, but this was Cecilia's stage. She was dressed not in a power suit of stark black, but in a tailored dress of deep aubergine. It was a color of quiet royalty, of bruises healed into strength. She was calm, a deep placid lake where a storm had once raged. The fury that had fueled her for months had burned itself out, leaving behind a clean, hard clarity. This was not the final act of a revenge tragedy. It was the inevitable closing of a ledger. She walked to the head of the table, the seat of authority Jake had once occupied by divine right, and sat down. The leather was cool against her back. She looked out the vast window at the steel and glass canyons of the city, at the Omni Tower visible in the distance, a monument to a life that no longer felt like hers. She had built a universe in 6 months, and today she was simply collecting a final stray moon. Diana set her briefcase down with a soft click. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice low. Cecilia's gaze didn't leave the window. "I've been ready since the day he laughed." The door opened and Jake Vaughn entered. The man who walked in was a faded photograph of the Titan from 6 months ago. His custom Tom Ford suit, once a second skin of power, now seemed to hang on him a size too big for his diminished presence. His skin had a gray, papery quality, and his eyes, which had once crackled with arrogant energy, were hollowed and dull. He walked with the hesitant, shuffling gait of a man navigating a minefield, followed by Arthur Finch, whose usual predatory confidence had been replaced by the anxious air of a man attending his client's execution. Jake's head was down, his gaze fixed on the path to his chair. He didn't see her until he was halfway to the table. When he finally looked up, he stopped so abruptly that Finch almost bumped into him. His eyes widened. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a waxy mask of disbelief. He saw her sitting in his seat, her posture relaxed, her expression a mask of serene neutrality. He saw the woman he had discarded, the footnote to his success story, and his mind, already fractured by weeks of failure, shattered completely. He understood in that one blinding, horrifying instant the source of the hurricane that had torn his world apart. "You," he breathed. The word was not an accusation. It was a surrender. It was the sound of a king realizing the ghost haunting his castle was not only real, but was now sitting on his throne. "Hello, Jake," Cecilia said. Her voice was perfectly even, carrying across the silent room with unnerving clarity. It held no triumph, no malice, only the quiet authority of a fact stated. She gestured to the chair directly opposite her, the supplicant's seat, the one she herself had occupied on that fateful day. "Please have a seat. We have a lot to finalize." He remained frozen for a long moment, his brain visibly short-circuiting. He looked from her to Diana Shaw, then back to Cecilia, as if trying to find a flaw in this impossible reality. But there was none. This was real. This was happening. He had been so consumed with fighting an anonymous corporate enemy, this Aura Analytics, that he had never once considered the true identity of his foe. He had looked everywhere but at the person he had deemed most irrelevant. Slowly, like a man moving underwater, he stumbled to the chair and collapsed into it. Arthur Finch scurried to his side, fumbling with his briefcase, the rustling of his papers, an unnaturally loud intrusion into the thick, suffocating silence. The lawyers began their sterile ballet of legal jargon, their voices a low drone that seemed to fade into the background. Cecilia watched Jake. He wasn't listening to the terms of his company's dissolution. He was staring at her, his eyes a maelstrom of confusion, rage, and a dawning, terrible respect. He was searching her face for a trace of the woman he had married, the quiet, supportive academic he had so easily dismissed. He found nothing of her. The woman who sat before him was a stranger forged in the fire of his own contempt. He had created his own destroyer. Finally, the moment arrived. Finch slid the final document across the gleaming mahogany. It was the master sale agreement, the paper that would formally transfer the entirety of Sterling Vaughan Enterprises, his name, his life's work, his identity to her. Jake stared at the signature line as if it were the edge of a cliff. His hand resting on the table trembled. The silence returned heavier this time. It was a weighted blanket pressing down on him. Cecilia let it sit, letting him feel every ounce of its pressure. She had waited 6 months for this moment, for this specific, symmetrical quiet. Then she leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table, and her voice cut through the stillness, soft and precise as a scalpel. "You told me I wouldn't last 6 months in the real world," she said, not as an accusation, but as a simple recollection of fact. "You said it was brutal." Jake flinched as if struck. His gaze darted around the room, anywhere but at her. He remembered the words. He remembered the feeling of absolute certainty, of magnanimous power. Cecilia paused, letting the memory fully surface in his mind. Then she delivered the final blow. "You laughed when I said I'd be fine." The sound of that laugh, his own deep dismissive roar, seemed to echo in the room. He could hear it. He could feel it. The full catastrophic weight of his arrogance crashed down upon him. It hadn't been a simple mistake. It was a fatal miscalculation of character, a failure of vision so profound it had cost him everything. He hadn't just underestimated her abilities. He had failed to understand her spirit. His face, a canvas of defeat, crumpled. The last of his pride disintegrated, turning to ash. He reached for the pen, his hand shaking so badly he could barely grip it. The scratch of the nib against the heavy paper was the only sound in the room, a ragged final heartbeat. He scrawled a barely legible signature, a jagged wound on the page, and then shoved the document away from him as if it were contaminated. It was done. Cecilia stood, her movements fluid and unhurried. She gave the signed paper a cursory glance before turning it over to Diana. Her business here was concluded. She gave Jake one last long look, a look devoid of pity, empty of triumph. It was a look of closure. The equation was balanced. The debt was paid. She turned and walked toward the door, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. Each step was a punctuation mark at the end of a long and painful chapter. "Cecilia." Jake's voice was a ragged whisper behind her, a ghost's plea. She stopped, her hand resting on the cool metal of the doorknob, but she did not turn around. To look back now would be to give him an ounce of power he no longer deserved. "What are you going to do with it?" he asked, his voice cracking. "With my company." Cecilia stood motionless for a moment, considering the ruin he had made and the potential that lay dormant within it. She thought of her original thesis, of the elegant ethical system she had envisioned, of a future he had been too greedy to see. "I'm going to make it what it was always supposed to be," she said, her voice clear and final. And with that she opened the door and walked out, leaving Jake Vaughan alone in the echoing silence of the empire he had lost, finally and utterly defeated by the sound of his own laughter. In the end, the story of Cecilia Brooks and Jake Vaughan isn't just about revenge. It's a powerful testament to resilience, a story about reclaiming one's own narrative. It's about the incredible power that can be unlocked when underestimation meets unshakable resolve. Cecilia didn't just build a company. She rebuilt herself using the very bricks her ex-husband had thrown at her. She proved that the most formidable empires aren't built on arrogance and dismissal, but on true vision, hard work, and the quiet, burning fury of a spirit that refuses to be broken. Her journey reminds us that sometimes the most profound catalyst for change isn't a word of encouragement, but the echo of a laugh that challenges you to prove it wrong. Thank you so much for listening. What did you think of Cecilia's ultimate comeback? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and vindication, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next real-life drama.